I'm Ariana Brocious.
I'm Kushan Abadar.
And this is Climate One. Hey Kusha, I want to start today's show with a good news story I just read this week in Canary Media. In March, the U.S. got more electricity from renewables than it did from methane gas.
Oh, that is cool.
Yeah, and it's really notable because usually gas is our largest fuel source for electricity. And so this is according to data from the think tank Ember.
So I'm guessing like solar, wind, renewables were the ones growing?
Yeah, solar and wind mostly. And the article pointed out that even though the Trump administration has really cut federal support for these industries, they're still growing their market share because electricity demand keeps rising, and solar, wind, and batteries are the fastest, cheapest way to get new power onto the grid.
My understanding is that there's this other side to it too, where at the same time, methane gas has seen big demand from the data center explosion. But it's almost creating this like catch-22 because the demand is so high, it's worsening the supply chain bottleneck that already existed for manufacturers of gas turbines. They just can't fill orders fast enough.
Right. So we might continue to see renewables beat out methane gas in other months.
That is good. I appreciate that good news story. Thank you, Ariana. Let's get to today's episode. So as you know, we're recording this just ahead of SF Climate Week, and I'm excited because I'm about to head to San Francisco to host a whole series of fascinating, inspiring climate conversations with a live audience.
It's true. We have a really great lineup of guests and events this year. And listeners, you'll be hearing those conversations in the coming weeks right here on our radio show and podcast. But for today's show, we want to revisit two excellent and inspiring conversations we had last year.
Absolutely. And I'm delighted that we're hearing from these guests again because each of them approaches climate change in a different and unique way.
We're going to start this next conversation in the middle of the country in a place aptly called Center, North Dakota. That's where author and activist Taylor Brorby grew up. As a fourth-generation member of a fossil fuel family, he struggled to find his place as a young gay kid who loved art, music, nature, and poetry. Over time, he channeled that tension into writing and activism. His novel, Boys and Oil: Growing Up Gay in a Fractured Land, was published in 2022.
Well, Center seems to be the middle of nowhere other than the center of my imagination. It's sort of a hubristically named town. I mean, the interstate doesn't even go through Center. Center has one stop sign. There's not even a stoplight in the county. It's the only incorporated town. So when I was little, it would take me fewer than 10 minutes to bike from one end of town to the other. And, the only sort of notable thing is the large drag line clawing away at the earth for strip mining lignite coal. And when I look back at it, no one talked like this, but it's very clear to me I grew up in a company town. Everybody was connected to that industry, and even so much that even in our recreation, the first hole of the Square Butte Creek golf course tees up as if you're hitting towards the power plant where my mother spent the entirety of her career. So even in your recreation, it's like a postmodern volcano god, like you will worship it. And at the base of that power plant is also the only lake in North Dakota that never freezes. Just a gentle reminder, every lake in North Dakota should freeze.
It's a cold place in the winter.
It's a cold place. Like if you and I went back for a little vacay in January, we could sit in that lake, Nelson Lake, with stocking caps on, and it would be bathtub warm. And that's from the water being used to cool the coal-fired turbine engines of that power plant. But beyond that industry, what growing up in Center really gave me was the wide world, the big, beautiful world. I mean, the Square Butte Creek was my babysitter in the afternoon. I could go fishing there all day. It was beyond the wheat field, beyond the backyard of my house. And that's a great landscape for your imagination to run wild. Simultaneously, it can also be a lonely place if you don't quite fit in as well.
Yeah. So I spent 5 years living on the Great Plains, and it took me a little while, but over time I developed a really deep appreciation for the landscape. And your writing about the land is so evocative, and it really captures the complexity, the nuance, this sort of multi-layered kind of landscape that is the Great Plains. So I'm curious for you what growing up on the prairie and staring at these beautifully expansive landscapes taught you.
I think those landscapes taught me patience, that in American culture, we're so consumed by height. You want the tallest skyscrapers, people who think they're ambitious, go mountain climbing or go mountain hiking. Height doesn't really impress me. I mean, I'm a 5'6" on a good day, little Viking. I'm very intrigued by expansiveness, and very few people I've met have literally traversed the Great Plains. People will say, oh, I'm hiking Mount Shasta or going to Mount Rainier this weekend. Whoop-de-doo, walk across my prairie and get back to me. It takes longer than a weekend. And I think, too, like the late Minnesota writer Paul Gruco said, part of what the prairie teaches us is that we have to get on our knees, like we have to submit to it. And so it's also why it's a place that is so difficult to fully destroy, unlike mountains, which we blow up for mountaintop removal mining, or forests, which we clear cut. I mean, we have tried to clear cut the prairie to grow American crystal sugar. We've tried to plunge it from fracking. We've tried to scrape it through lignite coal mining. We've even plunged it with nuclear warheads in the northern tier of North Dakota. But that prairie teaches you it's one of the most diverse bioregions.
Yeah.
And so what that also taught me is that to thrive, nature reveals that we need diversity. We need diversity in our ecosystems. We probably need diversity in our human thinking systems as well. And so growing up there taught me we thrive when we're in diverse landscapes, in varied conversations, when more people are at the table that look different from us than similar to us.
Yes, yeah. There aren't that many books that explore rural life in the way yours does. Your book, Boys in Oil, Growing Up Gay in a Fractured Land. So how do you see your work speaking to this idea of diversity, expanding our understanding of who belongs in a place like North Dakota?
There are some other books that paved the way for me. I mean, we can go all the way back to, my whole mission is to make the Great Plains gay again, and someone has to take on great Aunt Willa Cather. She's been dead for a hot minute. But even in my home state, we've sort of produced an inordinate amount of writers who are queer. Ahead of me is Melanie Hoffert, who wrote a great book called Prairie Silence as well, about some similar concepts, more of realizing she's gay and a middle school sort of romance that ignited that. But I do think you're right that rare are the books that bring together ecological thinking or environmentalism and queerness. And when I am on my dog and pony shows around the country and I'll say, well, name a famous piece of literature from the American West or Great Plains about being gay, everybody quickly says that 28-page short story, Brokeback Mountain by Annie Proulx. Beautifully written. It's a horror story if you're someone like me. I mean, one of the characters gets murdered in there. And I think it's so bottom of the barrel to say it, but true. We needed a nonfiction book, and we need more of these books where the gay kid lives, where the trans kid lives. My book should not be unique in that landscape. We're talking about a huge swath of the country. I mean, I do not go to the 92nd Street Y. I rarely speak in San Francisco. I go to sexy places like Billings, Montana, or Brigham Young University. I go where other writers fear to tread because I know queer people exist there. We are everywhere. And we need to know we are not alone and that our stories matter. And so I think a book like mine, hopefully for anyone who's struggling, can see maybe not an exact path forward, but a way of existing in the world and trying to be who you are despite the circumstances.
Yeah, right. You were told by your first editor to, quote, remove the gay thread from the book. And instead you removed the editor. I'm curious what it took for you to reclaim and fully inhabit your voice in this book.
Oh, that was a very dark period, to be honest. The first press that this book was under contract for, I was under contract for about 4 years before I finally got an agent. I'd broken Boys in Oil into 2 books, one that I called the North Dakota book, a more geologic landscape writing, like a book by an author I really admire, Gretel Ehrlich, The Solace of Open Spaces. And then I was also writing what I was calling the gay book, which was kind of completely the human story of my existence on the side. But I thought anytime I was in the landscape in the North Dakota book, I thought, oh, that should be in the gay book. So it was this like psychic break in my mind of being not only thrust back into the closet that I'd worked so hard to get out of, but to then also think, well, why can't a gay man be in the landscape in the American West? Like, we need that story too. It's not just growing up gay in a rural part of the world. It's literally, I love the natural world. And rarely do we often think of rural spaces or national parks or public lands as overtly safe for queer people either. I needed this book. I mean, I'm a college professor. You need a book to have not only a tenure track job, but also I'm a type 1 diabetic. I need health insurance. And I was trying my damnedest to do this book justice and get it out there, but it wasn't moving at the pace I needed it to move. I wasn't getting edited in a timely manner. I wasn't given direction. I mean, the edits I kept getting back were start over. The book would be 450 pages, start over. The book would be 222 pages. I'd try something, start over. You know, I got to a place where I literally thought, I don't know how to spin a sentence. And then I gave a keynote address in 2019 for the North American Review, the nation's oldest literary journal. I gave a lecture where I had written it out and I didn't have anyone look it over because I wanted to test myself to see, can I do this? And when I got an instant standing ovation, I thought, something's wrong in the state of Denmark and it's not my sentences, and I got rid of that editor, because it was the exact wrong editor for me. But it was years of my life, I mean, I tried my best and sometimes you just have to part ways because people can't do what you need them to or are in fact holding you back.
Well, bravo for taking that step because it sounds excruciating.
It was, honestly. I mean, I don't want to be rosy about it. Sometimes people see a book and they go, oh, how lucky are you? And it's like, oh, let me tell you how much I suffered. I had to change presses. And then it turns out when you do get an editor who's gay, that makes a world of difference. So that was nice.
Yes, representation in all places. There's a point in your book when you quote David Orr from his book Earth and Mind, and I'm going to read this quote quickly. The plain fact is that the planet does not need more successful people, but it does desperately need more peacemakers, healers, restorers, storytellers, and lovers of every kind. It needs people who live well in their places. It needs people of moral courage willing to join the fight to make the world habitable and humane. I love that quote. I think it's so powerful. You talk a lot in the book about your path as a writer, discovering a lot of different literature in high school and in college. So how did reading that kind of work shape your path in becoming a storyteller?
Oh my God. I mean, reading David Orr, or like I had mentioned, Paul Gruco, or even Louise Erdrich, perhaps the most well-known writer from my home state, winner of the National Book Award and the Pulitzer Prize, but David in particular. I grew up in a house without very many books. I mean, my mother read Mary Higgins Clark and my sister read Stephen King, but it's not like we had John Steinbeck on the shelves or Shakespeare or poetry of Auden. And if I was caught with a book, and I use this word intentionally, my parents would say, go and do something. Reading was not viewed as doing anything. If I was obsessively drawing Jafar on my sketch pad because I wanted to be a Disney animator, they thought that was doing something. Or if I was practicing the piano, that was doing something. But reading signaled to them leisure, too much free time, not enough activity, and little boys should be active. So they sent me into the big world beyond our backyard and the chokecherry trees and, the monarch butterflies and great blue herons. And so they gave me nature as a gift, which I am grateful for. And what college gave me was that wonderful thing called storytelling and writing, and that you could take the knowledge you had gleaned from your experiences in nature and render it in stories. And Earth and Mind still is such a revolutionary text when we think about how education should fit into the needs of the planet so that it doesn't exhaust our resources, that we need economies where we flourish rather than deplete. And I love that, I can get quite moved thinking about this, people with moral courage to stand up. And we are in desperate need of that right now, of stories that are creative and just. And, as my late teacher, Jim Farrell, who was good friends with David Orr, would say, environmentalism can't be all doom and gloom. It needs to be fun and creative and sexy, and it needs to taste good. And that's a world I want to reach out towards rather than one based in fear and scarcity. And so someone like David, his work has been bedrock and firing me up to say, I want to be on the side of the good. I want to advocate and inspire and get more people in this jacuzzi because the water's fine. It's a good time.
We've talked on this show before about different kinds of writing around climate. There's a tendency to go into a dystopian types of future. There's a lot of writing in that vein. And also there's sort of a newer project coming out of Grist, which is speculative future, and it's climate fiction. It's intended to kind of imagine futures that we could have. And your work is nonfiction. Let's make that clear. But I think there's power in imagination too.
Yeah.
And, I'm kind of curious your thoughts on that type of writing.
Yeah, well, I'm definitely one who reaches out more for what's possible and what's exciting rather than the dystopian future. That's not one that I look forward to, even if that is the future we're moving toward. But, the history of writing in the English language would reveal that we've always thought it's the end of the world. I mean, read Cotton Mather's sermons. Back in the 17th century, we were all going to hell and it's over. Well, somehow the 21st century has still shown up. I think those mental stretches that Grist is asking writers to think about and contemplate do demand something of us. I think it's far easier to imagine a totally denuded world, one of destruction, than it is to think of the possibilities, especially if they're not purely technological. As my friend Wendell Berry would say, we can't use the same methods that got us into this pickle to get us out. We're not going to frack our way into a better future, for instance, though that's my second favorite F word, but we need some writing that isn't necessarily overtly rosy or through rose-tinted glasses, but actually maybe gets us to glance at the far horizon. And that's what, to your earlier question, growing up on the prairie, I got used to staring off into long distances and think, how do I get there? And we need more writers to take up that mantle to say, here are ways. It's far more easy, I think, to reveal a world like what the movie WALL-E showed us, which increasingly might feel like it's coming to pass, but I still like to believe there is time to resist and change. And if humans have made the world this way, we can make it a different way if only we have the willpower.
Coming up, Taylor Brorby on the rise in library censorship and how it's connected to silencing climate science.
We need those great books of science to show us what we know, what we don't yet know, what we need to know to live better on this planet, and to certain economic interests and powerful people, that knowledge is threatening.
That's up next when Climate One continues.
The This is Climate One. I'm Ariana Brocious. Let's get back to my conversation with author and activist Taylor Brorby. In 2016, you were arrested as part of the Dirty 30 during a protest against the Dakota Access Pipeline. Before that, you were already touring colleges, speaking about your experience in oil boom towns. And you write about this in the book, but can you share what made you think that you really had to take another step, that you needed to physically put your body on the line in this moment?
Well, I had lived in the Bakken oil boom in the summer of 2014, and the previous November, Deb Marquardt, my friend and former teacher who teaches at Iowa State University, she and I, before I was a student there, taught creative writing in the Bakken oil boom and traveled about 6,000 miles in 3 weeks or so. And I went to Iowa State to get my master's in fine arts and creative writing in the environment and study with Deb. She's probably the most prominent North Dakota writer who also teaches. And I thought she'll get what I'm up to and has seen some of the same things. So I thought, I'm going to move about 900 miles away from this oil boom. Great distance, to have perspective. The first semester I arrive in town, the country's then largest oil pipeline is announced, the Dakota Access Pipeline. It's going to be cutting through the very county where I'm living. And I just took it upon myself. I thought, I need to start traveling around Iowa. These farmers don't know what Bakken oil does to soil and stuff, and what benzene is, this known cancer-causing agent, and all pipelines eventually leak. And I just thought, I need to kind of help out and whip up a fury. And once that pipeline was announced, grad students and other community members had launched the Bakken Pipeline Resistance Coalition, which I had joined on and started writing op-eds and all these different things. In 2016, I had a large anthology of creative writing called Fracture, Essays, Poems, and Fracking in America, with some of our most prominent environmental thinkers like Bill McKibben or Kathleen D. Moore, Rick Bass come out, because we had contributors from 26 different states, and I wanted to show how widespread fracking was. Again, a book is a very nonviolent form of protest and informing people. And I thought, we need art to show, we need poems, we need short stories, we need nonfiction pieces by people from where they live to help sound the alarm about this. And none of it was working. None of it was stopping this pipeline from being developed. I went back home to go to the protest at Standing Rock for a few days. It was smaller, about 600 people. That was also a very informative experience for me. It's one of the first times where I was a visible minority as a white person and really listened and took in information and tried to build, connections of saying, we're battling this in Iowa. What resources do we need to share? How do we frame different narratives that this isn't only about water rights in North Dakota. It's also about soil in Iowa and a climate future and all these things. Now I'm going to get a little weepy, forgive me. But in 2016, a Duke University study confirmed that my home river, the Missouri River, was in fact radioactive. And the Missouri River is the main artery of my imagination. I mean, where we launched our boat to go fishing in childhood, I was just convinced this is where Lewis and Clark met Sakakawea, one of the most important meetings in this country's history of westward expansion, of course. And I knew I was growing up in this landscape of incredible stories. But when that study came out, my 4 nephews also depend on the Missouri River, as do 10 million other people, for their drinking water. And I was in my late 20s then, and when I knew there was going to be this action, I just wanted to do something that when my nephews are my age, that when they asked me, Uncle Taylor, why didn't you do everything you could to stop this? I wanted to have a better answer than, I don't know. Now, being arrested is a very dangerous thing. I would not recommend it to other people. And it is about the loneliest I have ever felt in my life when I was no longer in charge of my body. I don't think I have more chutzpah or more bravery than anyone. It is really an isolating experience to be arrested and to know that, you're really putting your body where your beliefs are. And I wanted to be able for me to look in the mirror and face myself and say, okay, I did it. I did that thing. And if I can be brave in that way, I can be brave in other ways.
Yeah. So you grew up in a region deeply tied to the fossil fuel economy, a company town, as you say. You yourself benefited from that extraction. Your parents were working in that industry, but you've also become a really powerful advocate for environmental awareness. And I think we need more voices that have that complexity that yours embodies, where you come from a region, you know it, and you also can then step outside of it and look at it. So I'm curious how you view your role in that way.
I was taught that in Lutheran Sunday school, from the Gospel of Luke, to whom much is given, much is expected, and name a famous North Dakota writer. It's usually a long silence there. I mean, there's Aunt Louise, and then there's like, Big Brother Chuck Klosterman, but he doesn't really write that much about North Dakota anymore. And then, the list gets mighty short. So in some ways, I'm so glad I don't live in Brooklyn where I have to compete with all these other people. I've got a big empty bookshelf I need to fill, and one that explores history, the history of the region I was not taught. North Dakota is kind of like my baby brother. I feel like I get to pick on him all the time, but no one else really gets to, though it's a complicated thing. We need to be supporting rural writers in their places because they understand the nuance of that place and the stories that need to be told. The history of North Dakota is the history of extraction. I mean, it certifiably begins with French fur trappers and then continues on with Lewis and Clark and everything in the wake of that. It's where George Armstrong last lived before he went west and had the worst day of his life. It's where General Sully unleashed his howitzers on the Dakota, and Lakota people. It's where Sitting Bull surrendered his rifle, something I was never taught, which is basically the bending and the subjugation of the native nations to the U.S. government. And I think in coming from that place, it reveals that North Dakota has historically been the testing grounds for the country's worst ideas: hydraulic fracking, nuclear warheads, clear cutting of the Red River Valley to grow Pepsi and candy corn, that is sugar, coal strip mining, and now library censorship as well. So it's this vast landscape where it's not only physical products, resources from the ground, it's also now the landscapes of our imagination that free market economics is coming after in that place.
Yeah, I want to talk about that because climate science is under attack, to put it bluntly.
Yes.
Science in general right now. And at the same time, there's a surge in book bans across the country. So how do you see the climate crisis, this sort of crackdown on science, and these censorship attacks connected?
Yeah, well, I think they're inexplicably linked together. I mean, to be taught good science means, in many of these conservative legislative attempts to censor libraries, they will also come after biological textbooks because, God forbid, you might see a naked human body, that educates you. They'll come after the Venus de Milo, classical books of art, much less Giovanni's Room, for instance. So it is the whole swath. And, knowledge is power. I mean, we can look, to your point, at one book from the last century written by a queer woman, Rachel Carson, Silent Spring. The Environmental Protection Agency credits its existence with Silent Spring, as does the modern environmental movement, as does the Wilderness Act, as does the Clean Air Act. This is why censoring books is important, because people know when books aren't censored, they become governmental agencies. So books are power, and if that can happen once, I am certain that it can happen again. That's what literature does. And so we need those great books of science to show us what we know, what we don't yet know, what we need to know to live better on this planet. And to certain economic interests and powerful people, that knowledge is threatening. because the status quo right now in free market capitalism is infinite growth on a finite planet. Plunder, 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 not replenish, not nourish, not be expansive. And so books that maybe reveal how complicated and nuanced natural systems are fly in the face of that very limited worldview.
You've written a bunch about the carbon capture industry, which has been kind of booming in certain places. It's a bit more subdued since the Trump administration came to power, certainly is not dead. North Dakota has several active and developing carbon capture hubs. Can you share a bit about your views on these projects and the communities that are near them?
The one I know best is called Project Tundra, which is actually happening at my home power plant outside of Center, the one where I would tee up my golf ball. And, this will keep us more dependent on the coal industry, which everyone in those 3 counties I grew up in, McLean, Mercer, and Oliver County in North Dakota, they want those industries to continue because that is the only line of work people can do. And this is the other thing we've been talking about. It is a limit of free market capitalism that we cannot imagine different systems, plural, to allow people to have meaningful work where they live, where they are not poisoned. It's a way to keep us dependent on a 19th century technology and fuel source coal to power our 21st century lives when we need to be looking at more regenerative ways of existing.
Taylor Brorby is author of Boys and Oil, Growing Up Gay in a Fractured Land. Thank you so much for joining us on Climate One and sharing these stories and your experiences with us. It's been a real pleasure.
It's been my pleasure too. Thank you so much.
Coming up, a show that helps young kids understand the climate crisis and how they can respond to it.
I think at this point, it's irresponsible not to talk about climate change for the sake of, quote, protecting our kids, because then they don't know how to protect themselves in a heat wave. They don't know what to do in a flood. They don't understand why any of this is happening, and they're not equipped to combat it.
That's up next when Climate One continues.
This is Climate One. I'm Kushan Avadar. When Suzie Hicks graduated from college, they were a theater kid, now with a degree, who felt the weight of climate concerns, but didn't know what to do with those feelings. After doing an internship at the New England Aquarium, they realized they could merge their love of performing with their desire to have a career focused on climate. With the help of a really cute sunflower puppet, at least I think so, they host Suzie Hicks, the Climate Chick, and Sprout, a children's show that teaches kids about climate to encourage possibility and hope, not doom and gloom.
We will be all right. Our future is so bright.
So the original concept of the show was called Suzie Hicks, the Science Chick. And it was a college humor show for a college audience on how to implement sustainability practices as a college student. So we had this through line bit joke that I was convinced that Bill Nye was my dad. He wasn't actually my dad, but I was kind of like a crazed fan a little bit and was like, why won't he answer my letters? And there's a video of me drunk crying in a bathtub being like, science is about proving the seemingly impossible, so why can't he be my dad? And yeah, we talked about how reusable water bottles are a long-term relationship versus single-use water bottles are a one-night stand, and talked about things like that and how to throw parties and how to explain climate change to your conservative uncle at dinner. And it was just so funny and fun and young and dirty and a lot of fun. So yeah, it was a great outlet for dark humor. And that's where I kind of fell in love with environmental media in general. But then when I graduated, I saw the Fred Rogers documentary right at a time where I was like, what am I gonna do with my life? What am I gonna do with my entertainment degree? Oh God. And I walked out of that movie theater and went, what a fantastic way to make a difference. What a fantastic way to change the world using the tools that I already had. So immediately I applied for a job at PBS SoCal because I was moving to LA, and then I got it. I got my foot in the door, and I've been working in kids media ever since.
Wow. And so the show has gone through a lot of iterations. It's no longer about long-term relationships or one-night stands. It's squarely for a younger audience. What's been the biggest surprise for you in the process of honing what your voice is?
The biggest surprise is that adults need to hear the exact same messages that kids do. Because when we talk about climate change, there's no set introduction that people have gotten. Like, no one gets like, okay, you turn 9 and then that's when it's in the curriculum for you to learn about climate change. Everyone in the past has come to climate change differently in their lives. And when you think about the first time you learn about climate change, it's usually riddled with fear, despair, and guilt. And so no one has been like, yeah, I started learning about climate change. And someone was like, it's okay. We're like working on this together. It was like, how dare you? And also everything is terrible and it's all bad. So what we are doing with the show essentially is being kind of a welcoming committee of being like, why is all of this happening? How is it affecting us? But then also, how are we going to do something about it? And most importantly, it's okay to be scared. And it's okay to be sad. And it's okay to be angry. And let's feel those feelings together. We actually just premiered this weekend at the Climate Film Festival. And the photographer, she was talking to me and she was like, I couldn't take pictures because I was crying so hard. And the show isn't sad. Like, it's a pretty joyful show and hopeful show. And she was like, I needed someone to tell me that if we work together, it'll be okay. And so, yeah, I get a lot of tears from adults, which is not something I was anticipating.
Well, kids are dealing with a lot these days. And your
Mhm.
show, like you said, it covers what climate change is, its impacts and solutions, but also just like the big feelings that come
Yes.
with learning about climate. That can be heavy. So did you consult with like scientists or mental health professionals during the development of the show to think about how it could be responsibly, effectively, caringly addressed to young kids?
Yes, absolutely. I essentially got a graduate degree in order to make this show. Right when I was making the proof of concept, the first iteration of the children's show, which was the second iteration of the show, but the first time we were doing it for kids, I went and got a degree at the Columbia Climate School because I was like, I need to know how to communicate this well. I know how to communicate. I have a degree in communication, but I don't know specifically how to do this about climate. And so I went to Columbia and I took comparative education, sustainability education around the world. I took science writing. I took climate communication just to see all of the different ways that people were effectively talking about this. And then we also partnered with the Climate Mental Health Network, which is amazing. They have this really cool resource called the Climate Emotions Wheel, which is just like a normal emotions wheel, but it's also about all the feelings that you could have about climate to understand what kids are feeling. And then I also ended up writing a thesis about something called ecophobia, which is what kids and adults get when you hear about something that's so big and so scary like climate change, and you don't hear any solutions to it. You just hear, this is really bad, and here are all the reasons why it's bad. Here are all the reasons why you're unsafe. But no, like, oh, and here's the people that are working on it, and here's what you can do other than recycling to do something about it. Where you go, I actually am all set. Like, I don't really want to.
Yeah, thanks, no thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I actually am gonna forget that immediately because I physically cannot handle that information.
Right.
And that's really common in children because they're like, whoa, I'm just learning how to spell the word cake. And you're telling me that the whole world is falling apart? I'm good. And so it's kind of the great thesis of my life, learning how to combat ecophobia. And so while we were doing this, I was consulting with my professors. I was consulting with people in the Columbia Climate School that were working on this actively. And then we were also working with the Climate Mental Health Network.
What ages does your show target?
Our show targets ages 4 to 7. So this is a little bit before kindergarten, going into early elementary.
Okay, and then you also, in addition to making the show, you teach in school, right?
Yeah, I teach 5 to 14-year-olds. I teach K through 8.
So talk to me about the 5 to 7-year-olds right now, since that's what you make your show about. What do you hear from them about nature and climate unprompted? Like, is it even on their minds?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, kids are incredibly connected to nature at this age. And we're kind of trying to capitalize on that because we are showing that children are nature, that humans are nature, and that in order for us to protect the planet, we're also protecting ourselves. So that's something that's really important. And one of my favorite things that I do with my students is at the beginning of each semester, I ask them, I say, do you think humans are bad for the environment? Because I'm kind of trying to gauge where they're at, what media they've consumed, what information they've heard about it. And the answer blew my mind the first time is that most of them were like, no, we're just making bad choices sometimes. And that's awesome. That is amazing because indigenous people have lived for thousands of years sustainably with the world. But in the last couple of 100 years, certain human beings made really bad choices that have led us to the society that we are in and the climate catastrophe that we are in. And so they already have a basis of understanding kind of the justice aspect of climate change a little bit, of like, a couple people are making a really bad decision and that's hurting everybody. Is that fair? No. And then we get to talk about how awesome it is to live on Earth. That is the first thing I always teach kids. I'm not, people when they think I teach climate change are like, I'm going in being like, the wildfires and the hurricanes and we're all going to die in a heat wave. I'm like, no, how cool is it that our atmosphere gives us liquid water, air to breathe, and a stable temperature? That's really specific. There's not really anywhere else that we know in the universe that is just like Earth. There are some places really far away that could be just like Earth, but we don't know. And so we ground it kind of in the gratitude of like, how sick is it that this climate system exists? It has really specific needs, and those needs are not being met right now.
It's such an interesting take on the idea of how to navigate the phobia that you're talking about, of the brain not being able to process the existential danger. Do you ever get the question of like, why not just let the kids be innocent without planting the idea that there are things they should be concerned about if they're not yet? Like, why introduce them to the fear?
Well, because it's happening. Climate change is already happening everywhere. Like, I think at this point, it's irresponsible not to talk about climate change for the sake of, quote, protecting our kids, because then they don't know how to protect themselves in a heat wave. They don't know what to do in a flood. They don't understand why any of this is happening, and they're not equipped to combat it. And they're not equipped to understand that by transitioning to renewable energy, we're keeping ourselves safe for the future, or by putting more plants in a neighborhood, you're actually helping prevent floods, or by creating cooling centers, you're saving lives. Like, it's kind of a safety issue at this point.
You have a character on your show named Sprout, and I feel
do.
like that is a central part to the way that you actually navigate the difficult conversations, right? Tell me a little bit about Sprout.
Sprout is a sunflower. She's a little plant, but she's too little to bloom yet, so she's just green. And she represents kind of everyone's inner child, specifically as they learn about climate change. And so very similarly to the way that Daniel Tiger represented Fred Rogers' inner child, Sprout is my inner child in terms of climate change. And so she's so excited. She loves the world. She wants to grow up in a healthy world. She's like obnoxious in a lot of situations. And she's like coded as a 5-year-old. And she wants to learn about this. But in certain situations, when we're talking about it, she gets really overwhelmed and she experiences really big emotions. And so as much as she is curious about the information, sometimes we need to take pauses. And I come from a public media background. Like a lot of the pedagogy that I work with is PBS oriented. So PBS, it really focuses on modeling positive behavior. And so her and I together co-regulate during the show and model positive adult-child interactions so that when she's feeling overwhelmed, she's able to look to me as the trusted adult, and I'm able to help her navigate these situations so that she can navigate them on her own. So in the first episode, which is out right now, she just gets really overwhelmed about climate. And she's like, I feel really small. I don't know what to do. This is really overwhelming. And we sing a song called Stop, which is a behavioral technique that is stop, take a breath, observe how you are feeling, and proceed.
Here's something that we can do when the world feels like too much. It takes a minute, maybe two. Just remember, we can always stop.
Stop.
And we sing this song and we go S-T-O-P. And it's a regulation tool that kids can hum when they are feeling overwhelmed. And, you know, it's something that is specifically climate related, but it's a general emotional resilience tool as well for any time a kid is having a big feeling. So we do that. And then we take it a step further where I say, I know this is really overwhelming. This can be really scary. Here are the amazing adults working to keep you safe and who are using creative ideas to solve this problem. So then we can go and we meet a climate role model, and she gets to see someone who's working in renewable energy or who's working in climate policy or something there. And then we get to say, and you can be a part of this too. at the end of the first episode, she gets a tiny little solar panel where she can use it wherever she wants. But then she's like, well, plants basically invented the idea of solar power. And I was like, yeah, you're right. So she gets to go through a full emotional arc every episode, which is what, kids are experiencing in real life.
Yeah. How are kids reacting to Sprout in person?
Oh, they're so mad when I'm the person they meet after the show and not Sprout.
And not Sprout, yeah.
I had a kid on Saturday at the premiere be like, where is Sprout? And I was like, oh, she's at a gig in LA. I'm sorry. And then his mom was like, do you want to take a picture with Suzie? And he was like, no. He like, truly, she is the star of the show. I am just the caretaker of her, essentially. Like, it's Sprout's show, and I'm just also there.
I mean, that's just called good character development. Is what that
thank
is.
you. I'd like to think so as well.
Well, let's talk about you a little bit in terms of not just the show, but your role in the advocacy that you believe in. How do you see your role in helping shape a climate narrative for kids from one of doom and gloom to solutions and possibility?
Yeah, I mean, I think storytelling has been completely underutilized in the climate movement because there are concepts that we need to teach, and we know that stories are a way that people learn. Oral tradition has been the lessons for generations. People tell each other stories to teach lessons of morality, to teach lessons of safety, everything. And for me, it's really exciting to be in this moment of being like, I can help people communicate things that they don't know how to do to audiences that could be really engaged. Like, I don't have a, set one-to-one ROI. When people ask me what I'm hoping for, I'm like, well, I hope the kids that I teach grow up to be climate positive human beings. And I am really starting to see that because my kids that I teach are starting to have that scaffolding foundation of information. So right now, what I do is I work at Netflix helping the family and animation departments consult on climate and on sustainability so that when they are crafting a really good narrative, I'm able to help them with that prompt specifically of climate and sustainability. So I am really excited to use my skills and my talents and the things that I'm good at and love to tackle the giant prompt of my life, which is the climate crisis.
Well, what kind of feedback have you gotten from educators and parents about this approach, specifically for your show?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Educators are thrilled that something exists that they can use, that they're able to practice emotional resilience with their students. I had a kindergarten teacher who's one of my friends text me a story that her and her students watched my show. And then a couple of weeks later, they were watching another show and a character was having really big feelings. And one of the kids raised their hands and was like, I think they need to stop, like Suzie and Sprout. And I thought that was so wonderful. And then I always get, notes from parents. It's all anecdotal. So I get notes from parents being like, my kid won't stop saying atmosphere, or they won't stop signing CO2. And we have a dance to the song at the end of the episode where it's hydro, geo, wind and sun. Energy is all around for everyone. And we have a dance to it, and kids are just like, my students are like, can we do the dance? And I'm like, after you write your name, we can do the dance. So I think by creating something that is robust and also really fun, we're giving educators a tool to use in their classrooms, parents a strategy to talk about something that's really hard, and kids a really fun way to be introduced to a topic that isn't always fun to learn about.
Yeah. You said something that really struck me a couple of minutes ago about storytelling being so underutilized in the climate space. And I'm wondering for you, from your vantage point, do you think people in the climate space are getting something wrong about storytelling?
I don't think that people are getting anything wrong, just because I know everybody in the climate movement is doing their absolute best. And I'm sure in 20 years, somebody is going to be like, Suzie Hicks was doing their best, but they didn't know this. And I kind of hope that happens.
Yeah, sure. Shoulders of giants, right?
Industry will. Yes, exactly. Yeah. I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, and one day somebody will stand on me. But the thing that is missing is success stories. Because in the news cycle, we are constantly seeing not failures, but like the environmental movement getting bowled over by the administration and corporate interests and loggers and forever chemicals and AI and, what have you. It's constantly positioning environmental activists as losers. essentially. Not losers in the fact that we're not doing anything, but losers in the fact that we are not winning. And so something that my producer and I have started doing is doing climate bedtime stories, where we turn an environmental success story into a climate bedtime story to say the good guys do actually win in a lot of scenarios. And so that's replicable, because when something works somewhere, odds are that it could work somewhere else. So in very much the way that decentralized organizing and grassroots movements work, when you hear something that worked in a grassroots movement in Utah or Arizona, you may be able to replicate it. And so my job as an educator and as a storyteller is to say, there are good things happening, even though the dominant narrative right now is everything is bad. Here are the bright spots. And the more bright spots we have, the brighter everything gets.
What do you hope to be the future of your show, or more generally of your work?
I'm really grateful for my producer because she is more ambitious than I am. When I first started this project, I was like, if 4 people see my show, I will be thrilled. But because I've partnered with my producer, she is like, this is an IP that we are going to change the world with. And I was like, what? Cool. I just wanted to write a little silly show. So right now what we're doing is we're creating the show. We're also doing a ton of different pieces of content beyond the show, but that's like in the cinematic universe. So one thing that we're doing is we are writing meditations for kids that are like nature focused. And so it's when a kid is having a big feeling, they can come listen to my voice, be like, let's walk through a forest together, or let's sit and watch the clouds go by. So we have many different creative IPs, but we're also creating a year worth of curriculum for teachers to use. We already have 7 pieces of curriculum for the show, but we're creating a program called the Climate Buddy Classroom Program, where teachers can have...
For 4 to 7-year-olds?
Yes, for 4 to 7 classrooms, where teachers can have climate word of the day. They can have morning meeting prompts. They can do things. We're doing a thing called Sprout in the Wild, where kids can print out a picture of Sprout and put her on a popsicle stick and then take her to various environments and show the climate where they live. And so we have these immense educational goals as well as creative and TV-based goals, because we understand that climate education is a movement and it requires a lot of creativity. And so we're trying to be kind of pioneers in that space, which is really exciting and really hard when I'm up at Thursday night at midnight being like, I have 4 pieces of curriculum to write before tomorrow and I don't know what I'm going to do, but it's exciting. So hopefully we do it. Check back in a couple years.
Oh, well, we'd love to. Suzie Hicks is a climate media maker and an educator. Suzie, thanks for all of your work and thanks for telling us about it.
Thank you for having me.
Suzie Hicks, The Climate Chick, and Sprout is streaming on Canopy and YouTube. And that's our show. Thanks for listening. You can see what our team is thinking about by subscribing to our newsletter. Sign up at climateone.org.
Climate One is a production of the Commonwealth Club. Our team includes Greg Dalton, Brad Marshland, Jenny Park, Ariana Brocious, Austin Colon, Megan Basilia, and Rachel Lacey. Our theme music, that's by George Young, and I'm Kusha Navadar.